thing is that the Sally man you wait. So like I would just
And
say,
I looked at some of the stuff you said, and I got the article, and she sent it to me. So intriguing.
I'm on it.
Hi, I'm Molly.
Yeah.
Molly and I met in Prince. It's always a struggle. I'm just like, why is my brain, but it never did function in a verbal way. We're just going to say it. Totally. All the time. Lately. But she was with that's how she says, in the fourth year she went but it was all there are times when I say it in the thing, I'll say, I'm going to say that. I know we miss
Hi, and welcome to the Virginia Festival of the Book. We're so happy to see everyone here today. Hello, there we go. I'm excited to welcome you today to Amelia Earhart, George Putnam, and the Marriage That Made an American Icon, part of the Virginia Festival of the Book. The Virginia Festival of the Book is a program of Virginia Humanities, a statewide organization whose mission is to connect people and ideas to the human experience. Most festival events are free, but not free to produce. Your support helps us keep this incredible event going year after year. If you'd like to support the festival, you can give using one of the QR codes located inside your program. I'd like to give special thanks to the Virginia Festival of the Book's premier sponsors, Michelle and David Baldacci, who helped make this event possible. I would also like to thank Anne and Jean Worrell Foundation, Dominion Energy, and the Joseph and Robert Cornell Memorial Foundation. Before we begin, please silence your cell phones. We don't want to interrupt our wonderful author today. Take a look around and note the available exits. They're right in the back there or on the sides here. In case of an emergency, our site coordinator will be on hand to provide assistance. conclusion of this panel, our bookseller will be available to sell copies of the book. And please support our author today by buying copies of Amelia Earhart, George Putnam, and the Marriage That Made an American Icon. Finally, we'd like to note that the festival authors speak for themselves and do not represent Virginia Humanities. With that, I'm so thrilled to introduce today's speaker. Lori Shapiro is an award-winning documentary filmmaker and journalist whose writing has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The New York Times, New York, The Daily Beast, Slate, and other publications. She is the author of The Stowaway, the bestseller and Indie Next Selection, and The Aviator and the Showman, obviously. The Aviator and the Showman was named one of the best books of the year by NPR, Amazon, The New Yorker, Smithsonian Magazine, The New York Post, and History.com. Her New Yorker piece, The Improbable Journey of Dorothy Parker's Ashes, won the Damn History Award in 2021. She also received the gold medal in People Profiles from the Silurian Press Club, did I say that right? For her New York Times profile of World War II pilot Cy Spiegel. She is an adjunct professor in the graduate program at the NYU Arthur L. Carter Journalism Institute, where she teaches feature writing. She is currently working on a book about Albert Einstein. Please welcome Lori.
Hi. I'm so excited to be here. This is my first time in Charlotte, so it's been a really treat. I've already been to Monticello.
She got the important stuff out of the way first, and she made a reservation. It's so disappointing when people come like, oh, I'm gonna go to Monticello, and you're like, oh, did you make a reservation? Sorry. So Lori's gonna tell us a little bit about what brought her to this book and how she worked on it, and then we're gonna have a little chat, and then we're gonna open it up to questions from you all. So Lori, take it away.
Well, I wanted to say that this book came out in July. I've been on tour, so any question you have for me is not going to be new, but maybe there's always a new one, but I'm very comfortable talking about the controversies of Amelia Earhart as well. You might have seen this even in the news yesterday that someone found Amelia Earhart's plane, and if you want to believe that, I have a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn. We could talk about that a little bit more. But I thought what would be very nice would be a very short opening that is in my book. It's my note to readers, but it really does a lot of the explanation of why I came to this book. Actually, my last book was about, had a little bit of Virginia venting with it because it was about a stowaway on Richard Byrd's first expedition to Antarctica. And one of the first books I had to read for background was The Birds of Virginia. But Byrd had a publisher named George Palmer Putnam, who would become Amelia Earhart's husband. And I came to Amelia Earhart mostly through Richard Byrd, although Putnam was also the publisher to Charles Lindbergh. So you could see what kind of people he was representing at that time. But let's start. This will give you a little bit more sense of me as well. Okay, sex, violent death, and mystery. If your life has one of these things, people might be interested. If it has two, now you're tabloid fodder. If it has three, you're Amelia Earhart. Because of these titillating elements, more people have gotten Amelia Earhart wrong than perhaps any other person in the last century. Wrong facts about every single aspect of her life. Wrong conclusions about her personality, her career, her goals, her sexuality, and her disappearance. My first encounter with Amelia Earhart was through a squeaky clean scholastic biography. Has anyone had that one? That my mother helped me choose from a flyer in 3rd grade. I was wowed by her story, and I well remember my dad's admiration for Amelia when we all discussed her at dinner. Decades later, Amelia Earhart floated back into my world when I was researching my last book, which was about a kid who stowed away on Richard Byrd's storied 1928 expedition to Antarctica. And by the way, I went to Antarctica for that. I go all in on my research. Byrd's publisher, George Palmer Putnam, had organized a national competition for a Boy Scout to join Byrd's crew and then write his own Putnam book for young boys. I was aghast, because believe me, I've been down there in this very dangerous area near the Ross Sea, which is someone had a heart attack when I was down there and she was 56. What kind of person sends an untrained boy on a life-threatening expedition to the bottom of the globe? Well, the kind of person who would marry the heiress of the Crayola crayon empire and then hire Amelia Earhart to write a book and then have an affair with Amelia Earhart. And those juicy details were somehow absent from my childhood Scholastic book. So, here was Amelia buzzing over the Hudson River to help promote Commander Byrd's departure. He becomes Admiral Byrd while he's at Antarctica, with the Boy Scout and the stowaway aboard. And it's been said that the story you should write is the one that sticks in your head. I realized I knew very little about Amelia Earhart. Was she the wholesome role model depicted in biographies for children? Or did she have a tarnished political background and a secret, messy legacy like Charles Lindbergh? Was she a great flyer or merely brave? What was her inner life like? And what was her later marriage with George Palmer Putnam, her manager, publisher, and business partner, like? I wanted a fleshed out narrative, an Amelia Earhart book for adults. And it goes on there, but I think that's a good point to stop. But that's how I got to Amelia Earhart, because I knew very little about Amelia Earhart, if that makes sense. And I want to promise anyone who has Amelia Earhart as their childhood hero, you're going to still love Amelia Earhart at the end of this lecture. We're not canceling Amelia Earhart. Her husband is another story. But Amelia Earhart did some amazing things, and her legacy, which we can talk about, in my opinion, is quite different than what we have her down for.
Thank you, Lori. So let's dive right in. What is the biggest misconception about Amelia Earhart?
Well, one of the things that you need to know is that George Putnam, who was not the head of Putnam Books, he was a nephew. His uncle, George Haven Putnam, was an octogenarian in the Jazz Age, who was really, I mean, if everyone's seen the show Secession or knows like the Murdoch thing going on, it was like that. Everybody was trying to get the attention of the uncle. And George Putnam was a man who was trying to take risks, push his very genteel publishing family firm into the future. But he was a master promoter. He was also quite Machiavellian. He would do things like pretend that Putnam Books was being blown up by fascists and write his own letters. And later he would go on to fake his own kidnapping. And that's written out of books. Because the worst mistake that you can make, and again, I teach journalism and fact-checking at NYU, is if you're working with the estate, they have their own story that they want to push. You know, they have a sort of whitewash narrative, and people will try to make George Putnam into being this prankster or this nice guy, and he was quite a bully to other women that were other pilots. He was good with Amelia Earhart because in many ways she was her meal ticket, but he was her meal ticket. I mean, this is not a one-way exploitation. The thing about Amelia Earhart is that she's a very good person. She uses her platform for good things, particularly feminism and saving the aviation industry after the stock market crash, but she's not the best woman pilot out there by a mile. She's not great at navigation. She's capable. I mean, she will go across the Atlantic by herself in 1932, and she's the second person to go across. But she was supposed to go to Paris, and she lands in a cow field in Derry, Ireland, but she's the second person across. Let's not knock it. But the thing that you need to know is that she had a promoter as her husband, and she was always pushed as the queen of aviation. And she was actually the most prominent feminist of the era and used her platform to push feminism everywhere she went. She was the president of a women's organization that's still going called the 99s, of the 99 original women pilots. And what we can talk about is eventually I got a hold of 200 hours of tapes that no one had listened to from that were taken in 1970 from everyone that knew Amelia and George. The only people not on the tapes were Amelia and George, but these were actually in Virginia, by the way, and you can listen to them tonight if you want to. But they told the truth. People were talking off records, and even her great friends like Louise Thaden. Do we know that name? Do we know Eleanor Smith? There was even a very good pilot who was not a great person named Laura Ingalls, not Laura Ingalls Wilder. But they didn't have George Putnam. These were the best pilots. They did not use their platform to push feminism forth. They wanted to make records, but Amelia really wanted women to achieve. And every stop, she would talk about women should be pilots, women should have rights. So this is a very different type of hero to me than someone who is we just knee-jerk say, oh, she was the greatest woman pilot of the 20th century. She just wasn't.
So let's talk about that a little. She wasn't the greatest pilot. There were much better pilots, excuse me, pilots with a lot more air hours than she had, who had flown big competitions. How does she become Amelia Earhart and all these other pilots are really not even known to history now?
Well, we need to go back to when Amelia Earhart first got famous. First of all, she was born in Atchison, Kansas, but her father, who was a brilliant lawyer, was also an alcoholic. Alcoholism has a lot to play in the story, even with her death at the end. Her grandfather was one of the wealthiest men in town, and she lived with her grandparents. She had a taste of wealth, and with her father's travels and being fired, a taste of poverty. She would go to 7 different high schools and graduate from Chicago, as a matter of fact. But she does try to save her parents' marriage. They eventually try to start over in Los Angeles in the early 20s. She's actually going to Columbia University to be a doctor. Columbia did not allow women in the main program, but they had something called the Extension School that's still going. When she decided she wouldn't be a good doctor, on a summer break she went out to Los Angeles, and this is in the very early 20s. And she took a ride with a man named Frank Hawks, and she loved flying, and later on she took flying lessons. As a feminist, someone who supported the ERA from the very beginning, she was a member of the National Women's Party, which is very radically feminist, run by Alice James, if anyone's seen Suffs on Broadway. But the thing is that she was a hobby pilot. She did a little bit of stunt flying, but there was no way for women to go up in the career in that field. Eventually, her parents' marriage would collapse, and she took a car ride with her mother to Boston, and she had over 31 jobs, including a sausage company that she started that didn't take. And eventually she answered an advertisement for to be a social worker, and she fell into that, and she was really good at it. She was really good with kids. She was teaching acting, but she had a little bit of a gimmick. She could fly, and she, like the way that my mother loved to paint, but on Sundays. You know, she was a Sunday painter. She would take a plane up, and she would fly and drop notices about social work events. You know, where she was working was in Chinatown in Boston. Now, we got to go back to Putnam. 1927, everything changes with a prize called the Orteig Prize, which is a race, who's going to be the first to go across the Atlantic. And it was assumed that Richard Byrd would be the first to cross the Atlantic. He had gone on a trip in 26 to the North Pole. He was not a pilot, by the way, he was a navigator. And he didn't take footage of it. And right away, people were mocking that he really went to the North Pole. So he decided he would do the Orteig Prize, which was a restaurateur offered $25,000 to the first person to go across the Atlantic. And Byrd had a mishap. You know, like it was like some mechanical thing. And in the interim, the flying fool, Charles Lindbergh, a male pilot, M-A-I-L, not M-A-L-E, came out of nowhere and overnight became the most famous person in the world. And George Putnam, who is really connected, he's one of those master connectors, was able to telex basically in a message to Paris, to the New York Times were sponsoring that expedition. It was not journalism where they had no stake in it. They actually had the rights to talk about it. And Lindbergh was broke, and he took the book, and he became a Putnam book called We, and it was the #1 bestseller of 1927. Well, nobody cares about the second person to go across the Atlantic who's a man. It's not going to sell any books. What's going to sell books is a woman going across. And a lot of women wanted their lives to count, including what we would call middle-aged, but I'm much older than the women that I'm talking about. Wealthy women that wanted to maybe be a passenger across. Even a passenger would be famous. There was a woman named Amy Phipps Guest. If you've ever heard of Phipps Steel, she was the wealthiest woman in America, and she wanted to be a passenger. She was probably in her 40s. And she talked to Richard Byrd about taking one of the planes that had gone to the North Pole, and she was secretly trying to be a passenger. There had been 7 women who had tried and failed. And her kids got a hold of this news. And they said, "Mom, you're not going across the Atlantic. That's crazy." And they came up with a scheme that she would get a replacement, an all-American woman, to kind of fight another woman that was rising called Mabel Bowl, who they called the Queen of Diamonds. And I actually love Mabel Bowl, but she thought she was just appalling. And there was basically what you can call the first reality show, a search for an all-American pilot. So Amelia Earhart was found up in Boston, a social worker, a wholesome young lady who also flew. She was a perfectly cast character on the first reality show. And she became famous in 1928, not for flying a plane, but for being, well, as she would later say, sitting as a sack of potatoes at the back of a plane and being the first woman passenger across. And that really, nobody cared about the men that flew across. Who cared? It was a woman went across, but she felt that she did nothing. And from that moment on, she decided that she was going to show them and fly across. And that took from 1928 to 1932, when she would fly across by herself, again landing in Ireland. But that is when she became famous again, but for her own achievement, and had another ticker tape parade in New York that she felt was well deserved this time. So that's how we get to Amelia Earhart. She's not looking to go across. She's found and to sell a book owned by the Putnam Book Company.
And in all fairness to Amelia, it was still dangerous to do that. I mean, there was a lot of crashes.
There were 7 women. I mean, this is one of the things we have to realize. One of the things I try to show in this book is character from the very beginning. Everyone loves Amelia Earhart. I assure you. That was like absolutely, I mean, I listened to hours of tapes that people knew her. No one had a bad word to say about Amelia Earhart. Even her rivals loved her. No one had a good word to say about George Putnam, which makes the book interesting. But the thing that was really amazing was how brave she had to be to get on that plane, because, I mean, 7 women died as trying to be passengers or flying. So it was no joke to get on that plane. The other thing that you need to know is that the man who did fly that plane, it was called the Friendship. She was revealed to the world in Boston, and then she flew up to Newfoundland, and that was the closest across of the Atlantic. So you could say you're going across the Atlantic if you left from Newfoundland, which I spent 2 weeks there to research that. You would have to understand that the man flying the plane is an alcoholic himself. His name is Wilmer Stoltz. A year later, he was a very good pilot. He would die from alcoholism in a flight, and she would go to his funeral. But George Putnam is putting her on that young woman on that plane, and Amelia Earhart knows that he's an alcoholic, and her father is an alcoholic, and she's getting on that plane as well. So you have to understand that there's a carelessness, a recklessness that is evident in Amelia Earhart and George Putnam from the get-go. George Putnam would also put young boys on very, very dangerous expeditions to sell books, and later young girls. And I'm talking 8 to 13. One of the characters in the book is a boy who's walking from the bottom of Argentina to New York City via Texas. There were 5 boys on this expedition that was going to be a Putnam book. 3 of them died. One of them was hospitalized, and then there's a picture in my book with Jimmy Walker, who's our Playboy New York mayor of the Jazz Age. And it's all great, but if you know that these kids had no agency, you realize who George Putnam was, but you also realize that Amelia Earhart took tremendous risks that she didn't always have to take.
But let's talk a little bit about kind of flight as a metaphor for her. For a woman at the time when women have just gotten the vote, being able to fly is tremendously liberating. There's a great quote from her in the book. She says, when she went across the Atlantic on her own, she says, "I was the one who's going to control the machine." What does that say about her as seeing flight as a kind of a freedom for her?
I think she's one of those people who was struggling for a sense of identity. She was born in 1897, so that is really a Victorian birth. She missed the flapper era. Like, she really wasn't, she's a little bit too old for that. But she was, again, someone who she went to a finishing school called Ogontz outside of Philadelphia. She wanted to go to Vassar. And she kept a scrapbook of feminist heroes when she was a teenager. I mean, this is really important to her. Feminism is really her MO. But what do you do when you're she dropped out of school to become a nurse, a volunteer nurse in Toronto, where she met Canadian pilots from World War II. She tried a lot of things. I'm actually not dissimilar. I've written novels and made documentaries and tried a lot of things. I feel like I found what I meant to do with narrative nonfiction and journalism. I feel like, yeah, I've got the zone. I'm bringing all my skills to it. But I think Amelia Earhart was a little bit lost. And she doesn't get famous until she's 31, which sounds really young to me right now because I'm not 31. But that was not young in the Victorian age. She was not married. She was engaged to a man named Sam Chapman for 7 years. It's a bit of she was really engaged to him, but one of the things I reveal in my book is that she really wanted to get married to a man named Thomas Varney, who was 63 years old when she was 21. He was a millionaire who was he made his money on the bicycle craze of the 1890s, and her sister is on tape talking about this, how she brought him to the parents to ask to marry. This is her sister Muriel speaking as my source, that no one had ever heard before. And he was the Billboard King of California. And the reason she wanted to marry him is because he loved the idea of flying and of her, a young girl that wants to fly. Sam Chapman was this man that was a boarder in her parents' house in LA. He was from Marblehead, Massachusetts, and he wanted her to settle down in Marblehead and lead more of a traditional yachty life in Marblehead. But her parents were Victorian. You have to remember that. Amelia Earhart is bringing someone home to her parents to ask for permission to marry. I mean, we don't think about Amelia Earhart doing that, but she was a Victorian woman, and they said no. They said, he's way too old for you, that's not appropriate. And a month later, there is a announcement in the Los Angeles Times that I found where her engagement is announced to Sam Chapman. Now, you need to know that George Putnam, when he meets Amelia Earhart in 1928, I mentioned in my introduction, is a married man. He's married to Dorothy Binney Putnam. had love bombed her, if that's a real 2026 word, but they did not have a happy marriage. She had a lot of money. The Putnams had the name, but the Binnies had the money from Crayola crayons. They were new money, but they had a lot of it. And he courted her. And their marriage was very sour from the very beginning. And when George Putnam kind of has this Svengali approach to Amelia Earhart, he is 10 years older than her, and he wants to get together with her right away. Now, one of my sources for that is a man that whose archives had never been looked at, named Hilton Whaley. And he was a PR guru, and he was the one up in Boston who found Amelia Earhart. And his archives are in University of New Hampshire as part of a conspiracy theorist files. That's why no one looked at them. And I didn't care about what the guy was saying. His name was Paul Brand, and he made up this whole thing about Japan. But Hilton's notes were there. And he was just talking about the whole time about how George was calling her the girl, and he wanted to get into her pants, so to speak. And it's really interesting. But Amelia Earhart was asked to marry him after he divorced, or his wife divorced him in Reno, 7 times. She knew who he was. He had a really bad reputation, but he was very good looking guy. He actually looks a little bit like Stephen Colbert. Once you see that, you're never gonna unsee that. But he was charming, he was Machiavellian, and if you've ever met a Machiavellian charmer, they make you feel like the queen. And he really pursued her. And she moved into his house with that Crayola crayon money bought in Rye. It's still there. And she had an affair with him. So by the end of the summer of 28, she is George Putnam's mistress. Which is okay because his wife doesn't really care. She's got her own thing going on with a young man. This is the jazz age and anything goes. I find this a lot saltier than the Amelia Earhart book that I had in 3rd grade. But there's nothing terrible going on here. This is just human nature. These are real people. And that's what I like. I like to read about real people, not manufactured icons.
And yet she famously calls marriage an attractive cage, and is really, talk about why she is so reluctant to marry anybody, and then of all people to pick to marry, that just seems the craziest person to pick to marry.
Among the archives I found in Virginia, at the Smithsonian Air and Space Center in Virginia, not the one in DC, were aviation journalists who were talking to Amelia Earhart before she had decided to marry Putnam. And she completely knew who they were, who he was. She liked him too. She was on his good side. And they basically said to her, look, if you want to fly planes, and she had found her calling, the way I found narrative nonfiction is really what I want to do. If you want to fly planes, you should marry George Putnam because he will get you things, and you'll be able to live in a life not as a social worker. Also, you have to remember that this relationship changes. They meet in June 1928. It's the end of the jazz age. Things are going great. By October of 1929, his wife divorces him in September of 1929. And when he finds out that there's a divorce, he tries, in October with the stock market crash, he tries to love bomb his wife to get back together with her. And she says, too late, you know. And after the crash, his uncle kicks him out of the family firm. You know, if you're a very genteel firm and your nephew is pretending that Putnam Books is being blown up by fascists, that's not a good look for him. And what he has at that moment is Amelia Earhart. And what Amelia Earhart also gets swindled out of a lot of money by a woman who's more like a Bernie Madoff figure. And they become a partnership. This is a sexual relationship. There's plenty of people on tapes talking about sexual relations. I'm very glad there's no 8-year-old girls in this audience. I don't see any. This is not a book for your 8-year-old niece. This is for you. This is an adult book. But you need to know something about women in the Jazz age. Men had conjugal rights over their wives. So even Dorothy Binney Putnam, who despises her husband, has to have sex on demand with him. And Amelia Earhart, he has conjugal rights over Amelia Earhart. Some of this is discussed on the tapes. But I find this fascinating. And they do have a real marriage. I've been married. I have, I'm just celebrating my 30th anniversary with my husband. Marriage is up and down. There's moments when Amelia and George are having a grand old time, especially after he delivers the training and the promotion for her to be able to go across the Atlantic by herself. That is her dream. She could not do that without George Putnam. She would have never done that. And I will say one thing that is really interesting to me is that how many people know that we're going back to the moon right now? This is the Artemis. I interviewed the women astronauts that are going to the moon. Their hero is Amelia Earhart. So one thing you need to know is that we do not get women going to the moon. We do not get millions of people inspired by Amelia Earhart, including my mother. This was her heroine or hero now, without George Putnam. And we were talking in the back. History is not clean. We want this woman to have decided she's going to fly across the Atlantic and change history and be the best pilot, but that's not who Amelia Earhart is, you know? And we don't get her influence on millions and millions of women and men without someone who acts as despicably at times as George Putnam. And I always say to people, but at the same time, this is not this devastating reveal of Amelia Earhart, because she is doing crazy flights. She is doing a flight to Hawaii, you know, flights in Mexico and breaking records. But she's very brave, but almost all of those times she almost died, because what she is doing is a partnership with George. She is lecturing. This is how the relationship worked. They would do a stunt flight, and then they would do a lecture tour around the country and put out a book. And that was how they kept afloat in the Great Depression. Now, I've done 33 lecture appearances since my book came out in July, but I'm not flying a plane tomorrow when I go back to New York, right? And you can't be a great pilot. Are there any pilots in this audience, by the way? If you anyone here, you cannot be a great pilot if you're not getting flight time. You have to be on the plane. Especially the planes are getting more and more complicated. The plane that she flew across, you can see where in Washington D.C. is the Vega. It's a little red bus, they call it. It's tiny. It's just been reinstalled after 7 years. Next to the Spirit of St. Louis. It's quite exciting to see it. You're not going to see Amelia's plane that she disappeared in, obviously, which was an Electra 10E, but there is a twin to the plane. There were only 2 10Es that is in Atchison, Kansas now in a new museum called the Amelia Earhart Hangar Museum. It's the exact same plane. You can see how big and modern it is compared to the plane from 5 years previously. She wasn't getting enough flight time on that plane. Her coach was a man named Paul Mance, who felt that she wasn't ready to go across around this last trip. Do you want to talk about that last trip?
Let's talk about that a little bit. You know, it has overshadowed her legacy so much, and as you said, someone just said yesterday they found her plane, which they did.
No, they didn't.
But what's so interesting is the question really isn't how did it go wrong. There were so many ways that flight could have gone wrong. Right. To look at it from a modern perspective, you're like, that was insane. I mean, they had to hit this little tiny island in the Pacific. She had missed, you know, as you said, she had shot for Paris and hit Ireland. Another time, I think when she was flying, was it from Mexico to Northern California? A ham radio operator had to kind of fly her in.
That's true.
She was fine if she could hit a big piece of land, but she was not that great.
In America, she would follow the train tracks, which was a very good, easy way to fly.
But there, I mean, and you detail that in the book, all the ways that, and all her friends were like, you're not ready for this flight. you don't know the technology well enough. Neither she or her navigator knew Morse code, which is insane. So there's so many ways, but why did the myth of her become her disappearance and she's on some island or she was a spy over her actual really
We need to go back to 1937. What is this last expedition? Remember in 1932, she's flying to show that women can do it. That's a very noble flight when she became famous as the first woman to cross the Atlantic. In the 1930s, she was famous for achievement, not for being someone who disappeared. In 1937, the Great Depression was worsening. So Amelia and George were flat broke. And what this last trip, was a trip around the world as the gimmick, so to speak. These are my glasses, I'll pick them up later. The gimmick was that they were gonna fly as close to the equator as they can. When I say they, does everyone remember she has a navigator, he's not flying the plane, named Fred Noonan with her, who, by the way, had been a navigator for Pan Am. I just did the Pan Am podcast, which is coming out soon. He was a tremendous navigator. He used celestial navigation using the skies. He had opened up many of the flights that Pan Am was now taking to the Pacific. There wasn't a better navigator out there. However, he was an extreme alcoholic. We need to know this again. And he was fired from Pan Am because of alcoholism, which is many of the Pan Am pilots are on tape. He was also quite a bit of a womanizer, which is also on tape. Not with Amelia Earhart. And one of the things is that he came cheaply. Amelia tried to fly around, there was multiple stops around the equator in March of 1937. It was a planned trip. There was a man who knew a lot that was planning, and she wasn't ready to fly, and when they got to Hawaii, her wheels turned out. And what happened is it's called ground looping. So it's not crashing from the sky, it's sort of like a belly flop right on the tarmac. And if they were broke before, Amelia and George were beyond broke now. And her friends wanted her, it had been mapped out, to wait a year and go in that same direction around the world. Howland Island, which is the tiny island that she disappeared near, would come very early in the trip. It was the hardest bit. Now the whole thing has been flipped. So she's leaving from Lae, New Guinea, a small Australian-run town in New Guinea where they had gold coming in and out, and an airstrip, to go to Howland, which is the size of Central Park, and to go to Hawaii. That's at the very end. Her friends, including a woman named Louise Thaden, who was probably one of the best women pilots, is saying, this is a suicide mission, Amelia. You don't need to do this. You're already famous. This last trip was a moneymaker, a retirement account. She had $1 million deal with a man named Bernard Baruch. New Yorkers might know Baruch College. She was very wealthy, to do a movie when she came back. She had another book deal. She was going to be the kids' ambassador for Quaker Oats. There was a lot of stuff going on. All she had to do was that, and the equivalent of $3 million was going to come. But what happens? George Putnam really pushes her to go the other way, and that's Louise Thaden is talking about this, as well as a woman named Jackie Cochran, who's another great pilot. And they're telling her, you don't know Morse code. From the man that was on that 1937, the March one was a man named Harry Manning, who was her navigator. She also had an affair with him in 1928, which I got, that's in the book. But he basically was a tremendous, he was a sea captain. He knew Morse code. They would not have disappeared. By doing it in June of 1937, she has not learned Morse code. She's doing 10 words a minute. And Fred Noonan, who's a tremendous navigator, that wasn't his job on Pan Am. That was a whole crew. Someone else was on Morse code. He doesn't know Morse code. And she goes up, George Putnam now takes over the plan. He's a promoter. He's not an aviation expert. They leave behind things like trailing antennas. There's all sorts of silly decisions being made. But one of the silliest decisions was to hire Fred Noonan. And he's pretty good in the beginning. By Indonesia, he is drinking heavily. By the time they get to New Guinea, he's rip-roaring drunk. They're fighting. Amelia Earhart has picked up dysentery. She's a skinny woman to begin with. She's 10 pounds lighter. If you see pictures at the end, she has very bad diarrhea. And there's people on tape that were drinking with Fred Noonan 2 days before. I don't think he was drunk when he went on the flight, because also on tape is that she took a car from Lae, which was this Australian aviation town, into an indigenous community with Fred Noonan to put eyeballs on him. To say, I know you're a drinker, we're not gonna drink on that last flight. She tries to get a man named Harry Balfour, who is the radio operator for Lae, New Guinea, who knows Morse code, to get on the plane with them. And he refuses because his boss, a man named Eric Chater, said, we're not gonna have planes going in and out of Lae, and this is gold that they're taking in and out, without a radio operator, a plane would crash. So we know that she knows the danger she's going on. Now, one of the stops that I did on my tour this year was at the Oshkosh Fly-In in Wisconsin, the EAA. Has anyone ever heard of that? The 700,000 pilots. It's like Disneyland. It's the busiest airport in the world, is Oshkosh every July. It's very intimidating for a non-pilot to be in front of 700,000, but I had a full audience, and I did learn something, that most pilots die from something you can call get-home-itis. It's basically, we just have a little bit more to go. Let's get on the plane. Let's get home. George Putnam was texting. He was telexing her on messages that we have to be on NBC radio. We just hurry up, just get home. She's going to be 40 years old. She's sick. Harry Balfour won't come on the plane with her. She's fighting with Fred Noonan, and they get on that plane. Now, they do get very, very close to Howland Island. They get right there because the Coast Guard operators are on these recordings, which is, by the way, called the Amelia Earhart Project. It's owned by the Smithsonian, and you can just dial it up on your computer tonight and listen to all the people I'm talking about. But the last person to speak to Amelia Earhart said she was frantic, but she sounded so close. He's parked on a Coast Guard cutter called the Itasca, that he opens up the window, sticks his head out to see where Amelia and Fred Noonan are. That's how close she was. So Fred was even if he had been drunk the day before, he knew where he was going. And now, she's frantic. That's one of the things she's saying. In the Coast Guard records, which is part of the US government, there's messages that she's run out of fuel. And this is what has happened. That her friends were saying that there's only a certain amount of fuel that you could take from Lae to Howland, and if you run out of fuel and you miss the island, you're screwed. And basically that's what happened.
So, sorry, no mystery here. Just human fallibility, ambition,
Absolutely.
money, all the things that...
And she was brave as hell, because remember, she got on that plane. She could have said, I'm not getting on the plane at this point. She always got on the plane. And F. Scott Fitzgerald said something in the Jazz Age, that the indication of high intelligence is that you can have two opposing thoughts in your head at one time. We can accept Amelia Earhart as this kind, brave feminist who also championed aviation when the bottom dropped out and really got people flying, like where she would take women up for rides up in Maine and really talk about as an ambassador to the air. And when we go on a plane now as a passenger, we can thank Amelia Earhart for that. Why can't we have that Amelia Earhart, this really supportive of women, pushing girls into careers, someone really saving the aviation industry at its darkest hour? Why do we have to have her, this perfect, iconic pilot. She also, all of her books were ghostwritten, all of her articles were ghostwritten. She did not design her own clothes, if you've heard that. I mean, but this is okay. She's a good person. We just don't have to have our icons perfect. I hope you don't. I don't. I would have been devastated if I found out she was a terrible person, by the way.
Let's leave it there and let's see if the audience has any questions.
So her co-pilot, her navigator, did drop out of the plan from the Pacific.
Well, then she had two, so the first trip, are you talking about the March trip or the June trip? The last trip. No, Fred Noonan is on the plane with her. Yeah, he never dropped out. We don't hear, what's very curious, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, is that we do have the Coast Guard records. The government owns them. I've seen another copy. I saw it first in Dallas, and then I just recently was in White Plains, New York, where there's another copy of the originals. And we do have very clear records that she's not communicating that well. That was one of her bad habits, that she didn't always make contact. There's a little bit of there's one key, there's a piece of equipment, which is like a ring, and that was a little faulty on the government end. So there could be a little bit of a mistake there. But if she had Morse code, she would have been in communication, and she's not checking in. But what's curious is that Fred Noonan, we don't see any communication from Fred Noonan at all during the last bit of the flight. There's all sorts of people who are going to write mystery into that, but who knows? You can't make up what's not there. I'm a journalist.
One follow-up. How much luggage do they sell?
Oh, wait, how much luggage did they sell as Amelia Earhart luggage? Well, that idea was, like many ideas, there was things taken from other things out, and the author, George Putnam, there was another person who had an idea of this luggage, but it was a pretty big side hustle. It was a side hustle during the Great Depression. Later on, they sold the rights to Amelia Earhart luggage to, I know people, it kept going into the 60s, I believe. I have a couple of pieces of the luggage. But one of the things you need to know is that George was always getting deals for her. But she liked that because she was able to fly. When her MO was flying, she had found herself. She found the reason to be, which is to be an inspiration to others. Many of the other pilots were trying to break records. I mean, one of the great pilots is Jackie Cochran, who was involved with the WASP, but she wasn't a very nice person. She kept African Americans out of the 99s. One of the things you find out again is history is not clean. I did some research in Oklahoma City, and I love the 99s. It's a very diverse body of women pilots now. But when we hear that the 99 women pilots joined together, like the frenemies joining forces, it's the 99 white women pilots. I mean, that gets written out. And the same thing is that I talked about how the Putnam family might write out some of the nasty on George Putnam, but the champion for Amelia's story, fighting the crazy conspiracy theorists that really started in 1960, is her sister. But her sister lives to 98. I just gave a lecture last week at the Medford Public Library. That's where her sister was teaching. If anyone's a Paul Thoreau fan, she was his English teacher, which I thought was a little, I didn't put that in the book, that's a little extra for you. But the thing is that Muriel would give her archives to Radcliffe, George Putnam gave his to Purdue, and anything about her sexual, she liked to have sex. I mean, Amelia, let's go, more power to her, right? She eventually would be married to George. It would be ostensibly an open marriage. I don't believe that she was involved with anyone else. I don't believe that she was involved with Eugene Vidal. I think I actually, does everyone know Gore Vidal, the writer? He would say things that I found archives saying that they were just platonic, and then later on he would just reinvent the wheel every time to get more and more traction. So if you've seen the movie Amelia, Ewan McGregor plays her lover. This is a funny story. I was trying to get Gore Vidal's biographer, Jay Perini, to do an interview with me. He wasn't available. He was good friends with Gore. And finally, I'm in New York City, and I'm in an elevator, and in walks Jay Perini. And I just said, okay, we're doing this interview. And he laughed, and he gave me a tremendous interview. And he said, Gore would just make it up. He knew, he loved it. It was like a sport. So, you know, fact-checking becomes very, very important in telling a story like this. I will say that this book, much to my delight, was excerpted in the New Yorker a month before it came out at 7,000 words. And the part that they chose was this last flight. And with some of the most controversial stuff that I'm saying, and I had 2 fact-checkers on me for 14 hours a day for 6 days. It was really intense. But I'm really happy for fact-checking. There's so few publications that are fact-checking today. It was an honor to be fact-checked. And I will say that if you go through that, you have to deliver the receipts. And I sailed through fact-checking. And I angered some other biographers because their stories now become, you know, less authentic. Now, I'm going to say, if somebody found something that I missed, then the story changes. I did the best with what I was able to do. But what hadn't been touched before were these 200 hours of tapes and these archives with Hilton Rayleigh in University of New Hampshire. And that really was new information. And you can only write a book that changes the story when you have new access.
Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a documentary. Actually, my book has been, little information. There's 2, I know those directors, and they're friends of mine, and my book has been optioned, and we'll see what happens. It's like a Mabel Bowl and Amelia Earhart trying to cross the Atlantic, but I'm actually friends with the other directors. RBG, they tried to buy my book, but it had already been optioned. So will probably be I don't know what's going to happen. There's all sorts of meetings going on, but it's exciting. They haven't announced my film, although it's been optioned for a while. I will be the executive producer. I'm also a documentary director, so I had 2 careers, and I'm finding myself very drawn to just telling stories on the page. I love it. But I'm very friendly with those other directors. They've asked me to come on board as well. It's complicated. You know, you sell rights. Amelia Earhart sold rights for her last flight. And she probably didn't want to get on that plane, but she owed product. You have to think about that. You know, she had a book deal, and they spent the money. By the time she gets on the plane to go around the world, there's quite a bit of sponsorship money that's come in, and she has to deliver. So one of the reasons she gets on that plane is not just because of get-home-itis, it's because I owe a book deal. I owe, you know, Quaker Oats has just paid for part of my flight. I'm supposed to be going touring, talking to kids about aviation. When you're under contract, you have to deliver. So I'm really good friends with the other directors, and I said, I'm sorry, I'm under contract, you know, but I'm sure who knows? The films take a long time, and maybe they'll combine forces as well. That's always something. I've learned not to think that I know the answer to everything. Things unfold. In fact, as many people saw, President Trump announced that he was releasing the Amelia Earhart files. I had no idea that was coming. I knew the files because I had them. That's in the story of how it was in my book. I had them because a spy during the pandemic met me on the bridge, Williamsburg Bridge, and I thought he was BSing me, and he said he was working for the Navy, and I just thought this was a tall tale, and a few days later I got boxes of files that are the ones that have just been released. So I knew there was no there, but what I didn't know is that by mentioning Amelia Earhart, I would have a second round of publicity for my book. I got asked to write a big piece for The Atlantic, which I did. They also fact-checked, by the way. And I did a piece for BBC, I was on the radio, and suddenly my book was selling again, like after it cut, like, so you just don't know what world news. I do believe that Amelia Earhart's plane will be found, by the way. I do think that it is in the Pacific Ocean. I don't think it's at a lagoon. I don't think it's on an island. I think that she tells us she ran out of fuel. Nauticus is a group. I don't work for them. They're actually contracted with the other documentary. But I went to Maine. I looked at documents there. I know them very well. They're a group that don't put out press releases that they found Amelia Earhart before they found anything. If somebody's doing that, like, I found freckle cream. Oh wait, it's not freckle cream. You know, like, that's a bad sign. But they're looking at the radio waves, the radio messages, they recreate the radio. They're very, I think they also agree that the plane is in the Pacific. And I want people to remember this. Is anyone here a Titanic person? The Titanic took a while to find, and it's Titanic. And we knew where it was, and it's in the Atlantic, which is like a pond compared to the Pacific, right? The Pacific, you can look, and it's like a pinprick. It's really deep. And one of the things that I've learned is that there's been a lot of spots around Howland Island that have been eliminated. So where she's not is also really good information of where she can be. The Titanic was not found right away. It was eliminated where it could be. The other thing is that planes preserve beautifully at that, I think it's 23 or 26,000 feet in the Pacific. It's probably either in one or two pieces. But one thing I learned from the Titanic is that paper preserves. So there's going to be no bones. If you don't have any fantasy, we're going to find a skull but little buttons, shoes, if anyone saw the Titanic exhibit. But paper, you can actually look, people that dive down can see the papers that people were reading on the Titanic. Now, Amelia and Fred Noonan were communicating with a jerry-rigged fishing pole. It was very noisy in the Electra, and there were messages being passed back and forth. Perhaps those papers, those notes exist. Perhaps there's an airplane manual, paper preserves. We'll find it. But we'll know that it's Amelia Earhart's plane. And you have people like Purdue University who bought the Electra saying that she's on a lagoon, but they're also doing branding, because you have to remember how much money there is in the Amelia Earhart business. There are not-for-profit foundations where people take a not-for-profit executive's salary of $250,000 every year. There's just, I mean, I had two people that I know I liked. They found Amelia Earhart's plane 2 years ago. My dad was a scientist. I'm a fact-driven person. I flew in to talk to them, see what's going on. And I was told, well, I had a sign that I was the one to find Amelia Earhart. That's a bad sign, that they were the ones to find Amelia Earhart. So you really have to know there's a lot of BS in the Amelia Earhart world, and there's a lot of money to be made. And look, an unknown person is suddenly in the news yesterday. Oh, I found Amelia Earhart's plane on Google. It's not Amelia Earhart's plane.
Darn. Well, thank you, everyone. Please give Lori a big thank you. And you can join us for a signing right outside of the
Thank you so much.
Yeah.